I started my career some 36 years ago for a company called D.F. Johnson's. They were a development company where I got to lease all their properties. I did this as a part-time job while at university, and from there they started strata titling their blocks of units, and I had the opportunity of selling their blocks of units. From there I decided that I wanted to go and do something else. I ended up with Richardson & Wrench, and I actually became one of their branch managers. In those days we didn't have franchise or anything like that. Richardson & Wrench were actually owned by Lend-Lease. I've also worked for Rain & Horn. I managed properties for CB Richard Ellis, where I managed some 6,000 properties. I was in charge of their head office at that particular time. It was just residential, it wasn't commercial as they are at the moment. I've owned a Ray White franchise, I've owned a Lang & Simmons franchise, and now I'm an independent agent. I do a number of things, apart from having the radio program on Monday afternoons from 5:30 till 6 o'clock. I also consult to real estate agents with regards to issues they may have in relation to their portfolios or sales or anything. I also sell real estate, but most of my business is referral business. I don't advertise myself on the basis that I'll go out there and get business from that. It's all referral business. And that's a very hard situation these days, because a lot of companies these days now have business development managers, which means that business development manager is actually going to be signing you up. They're going to offer you a fantastic deal. They're going to pass on your property on to a portfolio manager. Now that portfolio manager can manage anything from 125 properties to 250 properties. At the end of the day, you really don't know who's actually going to be managing that property unless you make it your business to go and interview that property manager or whoever and decide what they're going to do for you. Once you've signed up, normally you have to give 30 days notice, or anything up to 3 months notice if you want to take your business away from that real estate agency. So it's very difficult these days, and I get a lot of questions on the radio program. How do I find a decent property manager? What do I do when I've got one and I want to break my agreement and I want to move on? So these days you've really got to be a little bit more smarter about how you go about your business, the questions that you ask, and how you go about finding that person for you. One of the most important things that people don't seem to ask their property manager is, how long have you been in the business? How many properties do you actually manage, and who's helping you? If they say they're managing 150 properties and you say, well, who's your assistant? And they say, oh, I share a property officer with my colleague over here. Well, then you know you've got an issue, because no one in their right mind can manage that many properties and have a colleague that's being shared by somebody else. You find a lot of property managers these days are chosen not necessarily by their experience, but by the amount of money that the principal actually has to pay that person to come and work for them. It's all business related, it's all monetary related. Experience sometimes isn't all that important. When I do my consultancy, the first thing I ask is, how experienced are your property managers? And the principal always says to me, they're very experienced. And I say, how long have they been in the industry? I say, 5 years. You cannot tell me that a senior property manager can take on that role, represent you, represent your portfolios, look after millions of dollars worth of assets, and have such poor experience. I would assume a property officer would have experience of anything up to 2 to 3 years, and from there then go into a basic property management role. And a senior person would anything be from around about 7 to about 15 years experience and looking after your assets. Unfortunately, today the adage is still by principals is that the property management department is still the poor cousin to the real estate business. Property management is the backbone of a real estate business. It's the bread and butter of a business. And at the end of the day, when real estate sales go down the gurgler, sometimes they do for companies, property managers what stabilises the company, what brings in the company and keeps you going. However, not enough money, not enough experience, and not enough learning is put into property management departments these days to keep them going, to get the right kind of staff, and to ensure the clients that they are representing. And if you have an investment property, you are a client. You're not necessarily a landlord, you're a client that you're taking care of. So these are the things that are very important, and these are the questions you need to ask. How long have you been in the industry? How many properties do you manage? How are you happy in your role? And you can always tell if somebody's happy if they say, yeah, oh, it's okay. You know for a moment that's not really okay at all. If they say, no, I enjoy it, well, you're right. But one of my questions is, how do you like your job? I say, it's all right. And I think, you don't really like it, do you? And they say, oh yeah, it's okay, or it pays the bills. And then you've got an issue. I mean, these things are very important. And if you have an investment property, you are entitled, when you sign that agreement, to know exactly who's looking after you, what services you're going to get, the terms and conditions of that agreement, and what that agent's going to provide for you. How often are they going to carry out a routine inspection on your investment property? I mean, do they carry out one 6 weeks after the tenant moves into the property? I always say to real estate agents that I consult to, you must go and inspect that property 6 weeks after the tenant moves in, and you must tell the tenant at the time of signing the agreement that's what you're going to be doing. If you don't do it, you're not servicing your landlord or your investor, because at that time you can determine how that property is being managed, how it's being looked after, and if there are any issues in relation to that property that you need to address. There could be some repairs that are outstanding that haven't been taken care of, and that tenant's not going to tell you. They're just going to sit there and they're going to say, when that lease is up, I'm moving. And that's not a good investment for you. You don't want a vacancy period. As a matter of fact, long-term tenants is what it's all about. That's what you need. A good investment is to have someone on a lease that's going to be there for 2 or 3 years, pay the rent, accept increases, maintain the property, and keep the landlord happy or the investor happy. That's what it's all about. When you get an application that comes to your office, if you're a real estate agent or a property manager, you need to address it the minute it comes in. Last week I spoke to an agent and they said, I've got 3 properties that I've just leased, and I said, oh, that's good. And I said, how do you know you've leased them? And they said, I've got 3 applications. And I said, well, have you researched? And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, have you done your reference checking? Oh, I'm going to do that tomorrow. And I said, why can't you do that today? And they said, oh, I'm too busy today. Now, that tenant doesn't know that they're going to be approved, or if they're going to be approved, or if they've provided you with the right documentation. So by tomorrow, they may have gone somewhere else, and you haven't got a tenant. Now, if your investor knew that's the way you were treating his property or his applicant, I mean, there'd be a lot of issues to deal with, wouldn't there? I recently had the occasion where I leased a property, or tried to lease a property for a short-term tenancy. I phoned 11 real estate agents. I didn't get 1 call back. I texted 7. I got 3 text messages back to tell me that they couldn't show me the property only on a weekend between a certain time for 15 minutes because they were really busy. And all I could think of is, my goodness, I'm glad you're not managing my investment property. I'd be horrified to learn that you can only show that property for 15 minutes on a Saturday and you can't show me through the week. They said they were too busy. The others just didn't get back to me. So this is actually what's going on. And owners don't know, vendors do not know, landlords do not know, and investors do not know. This is something you need to be aware of. And that's where bad tenancies start. Once a tenant gives you his application, he's given you his 100 points of ID and all the necessary documentation, and you're processing it, and you haven't spoken to the tenant about receiving the application and that you are processing it, and you'll get back to him tomorrow or the next day or whatever to give him an answer, that tenant's already got a chip on his shoulder and he's always going to say, well, that agency is da-da-da-da-da. You know, I'm not real happy with our property manager. That's where it begins. It begins by communication, understanding who you're dealing with, and cooperation. You must always communicate with no matter who you're dealing with. Unfortunately, we're living in a society at the moment where communication is a very poor second. We all use text messages, we all send emails, we very rarely get on the phone, we very rarely tell each other what's going on. And more so in the real estate business now than it's ever been before. And that's what I'm finding. When I go around to consult to these agencies and I always say, well, how are you treating your tenants? Oh, we don't like that one because he's doing this and that and the other. And I say, well, why don't you like it? Because he got annoyed with me. And I said, why did he get annoyed? I was supposed to ring back at 9 o'clock and I was late. Well, it's like anything else, isn't it? That's the way we do business. If we want a good tenant, we want a tenant to stay in the property, we need to communicate, we need to keep them happy. When tenants are reference checked and they've been approved by the agent and a lease is being drawn up, normal lease procedures of an explanation of a tenancy agreement takes anything from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. Yet I see a number of agents that explain a tenancy agreement, which if you have one in accordance to the Real Estate Institute, is up to 16 pages long. How can you explain the terms and conditions and the requirements of a tenancy agreement in 15 minutes? You can't. How can you explain your procedures for rent collection and arrears, and of course repairs and maintenance and reporting in that duration? You can't. So that's where things start to go wrong, and unfortunately this is all to do with the services that the agent provides. At the end of the day, a good investment property is having the tenant in there, signing a tenant up, market rental, providing the lease, making sure your property is maintained to a standard and is being looked after during the duration of the of the lease, and ensuring that everybody's happy. It's not just the landlord or the investor that needs to be happy, it's the tenant as well. If you have a vacancy period in a property these days, you cannot lease that property until that tenant has vacated. You can show people through, but you cannot sign a lease until that property is vacated. A condition report has been provided, the property is lettable, and that could be anything to 2-3 weeks in a vacancy period, and that is not a good investment. And this is why it's imperative that you start on the right foot, choose the right agent, get the right tenant, and look after them. I've been to real estate offices where the property managers have turned over 3 times in a specific term, which is 12 months. One or two things is happening. One, they're overworked, they haven't been trained adequately, and they're not being paid. And that's normally what happens. As I said previously, property managers don't get paid a lot of money. I remember when I worked for CB Richard Ellis and I was paid $90,000 a year plus a company car and an expense account. And I thought I was on cloud 9. My God, I worked really hard though. And everybody else around me was on $40,000 or $50,000. The other property managers that were looking after portfolios were on $50,000, and they thought they were being extremely paid. But at the end of the day, principals do not pay their staff very well when it comes to property management, unfortunately. They get dissatisfied, they work long hours, they take their job seriously if they can, and they move on. And that's what happens. Well, we're already seeing that we've got a lot of stock coming on the market. It's taking a lot longer now to lease properties. The turnover used to be something like about 14 days. It's taking anything from around about 20 to 30 days to lease a property, even though it's, you know, you've got market rent, especially when it comes to units, strata title units, because we've got a lot of stock on the market. We haven't got a lot of people out there leasing strata title units at the moment. And the other aspect is it is winter. Winter is always a tough time, but they're talking about something like about 3,000 units coming on the market in the next 3 months. So you can imagine, you know, we're going to see these signs like, when, you know, they're going to be offering a week's rent free to lease properties. We had that a few years ago and we all used to do it. When we couldn't lease a property, we used to offer the first week's rent free. We're going to start seeing those sorts of things happening in the near future, I would say. I've been a member of 99.3 for 4 years. I've always been a subscriber of the radio station. It has worked very well for me. It's given me recognition. It's got my name out there. I've got a little bit of business out there. But at the end of the day, it's all about getting my name out there. It's not about me getting rental properties or anything like that. But people come up to me, it doesn't matter where I am, and they ask me questions. And I'm in the business of helping people. I don't always get paid for the things I do, but I enjoy my job. I have a passion for real estate, and I like to be involved in it. Thank you.